So the first thing, like Alexa said, sign in. And if you're on your laptop, you can also use this QR code. So I'll leave it up for a second, and then that's how we'll mark your attendance. And it'll count for 1 point towards the membership statuses. So I'll leave it up for like another few.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I was like, wait. So if you guys are on your phones or if you're on your laptops, you can literally just take your smartphone out and scan it. I don't know if you guys knew about QR codes. I'm assuming you do because, I mean, they've been around for a while, but I found out about them like a year ago and I was like, these are so cool. And I use them for everything in my job too. But I also dropped the link again in the chat box for those who joined after I dropped the link. So you guys can sign in that way as well.
Okay, so our general meetings are Tuesdays. I think everyone that's here is aware of that, but our next one is going to be week 6. And so we're going to try to have a professional presentation on psychology. We're probably going to talk about generally what careers are available. And we're probably going to be having Sarah, she's one of the academic advisors, sit in with us on that. So if you're familiar with her or if you're not, just be sure to come check that out. And then for our final general meeting in week 8, we're gonna have a mock interview. So anyone that's interested or thinking about starting the process for applying to grad school, specifically for a PhD program, our advisor, Kalina, is going to assist us with giving us advice about that. And the Zoom meeting link is the same one you're using today. And then if you're logging in on your phone, the ID and password are right there. And then we also have our office hours on Mondays and Thursdays. So be sure to check that out if you have any questions about anything in general or about Psi Chi. And then a quick announcement for our members that join in fall and winter. Some of you might have gotten this email. Just so you know, you guys are official members. Actually, your certificates have just been mailed out. So I just got them mailed to my house today. So you guys are the last round of people that are getting a physical paper certificate. If you want to pick that up when campus reopens, we'll make arrangements there. But you should now be able to log in on the international website as official members. We're going to make a video explaining like how to do that for the first time because it's a little bit complicated, and then we'll be posting that on the website. And then if you're joining this quarter for the first time, just a reminder, the deadline to complete steps 1 through 3, which we have detailed in the slides that we'll send out, is this Friday. So that's the Highlander link, the local application, and the national application. So it's at 5 p.m. And then once you submit that, around May 1st, you'll be asked to pay the lifetime membership fee, and then you'll pay the chapter fee by Venmoing me. And then again, since you're paying online, certificates aren't going to be automatically sent to us. So you'll receive a discount code, and if you send that code to us, we can then order it to you, or you can have it sent to your house if you want to pay an additional fee. And then graduating members. So if you're joining this quarter for the first time and you're graduating in spring or summer, we're not going to ask you to pay your chapter fee. There's a handful of you guys, just because it's your last quarter with us and we're online. So we're not doing a lot of physical events. So you'll be waived from that $10 chapter fee. And then also if you're a graduating member, even if this is your first quarter joining, make sure you fill out that link right there, because we are going to purchase $24 e-gift cards for the Psi Chi store, and we'll send that to all of the graduating members. So the stole, the like cloth you wear when you graduate, is $24, so it'll cover that. But if you want to purchase one of the bundles they have available, you can apply it, and the link for the store is right there. If you're a gold or silver member, we're probably going to increase the amount we send you. So for people that are attending a lot of events and counting their membership points, that's one way it's going to benefit you. And then again, here's the process for the applications. I'm not going to go into detail, but if you have questions, you can stick around at the end of the meeting. And then our requirements, again, I'm going to not go into detail right now, but if you have questions about this, you can ask at the end of the meeting. And then again, our membership statuses. So events that you attend count for a certain number of points. So we have the breakdown detailed right here. If you attend a general meeting, like right now, it's 1 point. If you go to office hours, that's 1 point. If you go to any of the upcoming socials, like the most recent one is going to be this Thursday, it's going to be a game night. That's 2 points. And then if you participate in our giveaways, there's more information on that coming up. That's 1 point. So yeah, it's all broken down right here. And you can look over by looking at this link, and it's a calendar. It's also available on our website. You can look at that. And then here's the prices and breakdowns for reaching these membership points. For the faculty luncheon, unfortunately, we're going to have to postpone that until campus reopens for obvious reasons. But if you aren't graduating and you do reach silver or gold status during this quarter, that'll carry over. Okay, so one of the biggest events that we're still having this quarter is our Psych. For those of you that aren't familiar, it's the Undergraduate Research Convention for Psychology. It's an annual event. The first one was last year, and we are continuing it this year via Zoom. So if you click these links, you can look at the information page, and you can RSVP to attend. And if you're an undergraduate student, if you're involved in a lab or you're interested in doing your own research, you can sign up to be a presenter. So you'll be presenting a pre-recorded video that's about 5 to 7 minutes. We're going to be having workshops and more information about that. But we encourage you to come to office hours or reach out to us if you have questions about that. It's a really good opportunity to experience presenting your own research in a really low risk way. And anyone that signs up is going to be approved. So just consider that, especially if it's your first time doing undergraduate research. And then here's information about the video that we're going to be putting out to walk you guys through how you can start getting involved working on your own project. And then also Q&A sessions we're going to be having to answer your questions about working on your own project. It could be general or they could be specific to your project. And then these are the socials, the ones. Again, these are going to be sent out to you. And I don't want to take too much time because we do have our panelists. So I'm just going to breeze through these. So yeah, I'm going to be announcing the giveaway winners for the best meme related to the quarantine at the end of the meeting. So stick around so you can vote, and then our first place winner is going to get a $10 gift card on Amazon, and our second place winner is going to get a $5 gift card. So once the presentation is over, don't rush off too quickly. Actually, sorry, I should have started with formally introducing you. It's just a little bit awkward since I can't see exactly where all of you guys are at. But yeah, we'll be hearing from Michelle, Kevin, and Asha. And they're here to answer your questions. I don't know if you guys want to start with introductions about your background before we get into the specific questions.
I can go first. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so hi everybody. My name's Michelle Fullbright. I'm the Senior Admissions Officer here at the School of Medicine. I have been working for the School of Medicine. It'll be 6 years in October. Started my career out in actually education for about 3 or 4 years, and then recently moved over into admissions, I'd say about 2 years ago. So I'm just here kind of support our medical students. I understand that they are doing a panel for you guys. So if you guys have specific questions in regards to admissions requirements in terms of our EAP program, which I think you're referring to, our early assurance program, as well as our Thomas Hyder program, I can help to answer those questions. Thank you.
You can go next, Asha. I'll anchor us.
Okay. My name is Asha. I'm a third-year medical student with Kevin. I don't really have other things that I want to mention, but I think I was brought on just to talk about the AMCAS application and kind of the process that I went through when I was applying. But I'm also just here to answer any questions that you might have about medical school in general.
I'm Kevin Westbrook. I sort of fit the non-traditional path entry point into medicine. Some of you guys might be a part of, although all of you look much younger than me when I started. So it looks like you guys got a pretty pretty young cohort, and that's okay. I came in after 10 years of military service, sort of entered into the civilian healthcare field. After that, went to school at UCR, undergraduate, studied neuroscience, decided it was a good idea to become a doctor, came in, applied to UCR through the early assurance program and was accepted in their, I guess their first round of applications in 2016, but the application cycle was 2015. I have an extensive background in medicine. I was a field medic, special operations combat medic, hospital administrator. If you have a position in healthcare, I've probably filled it at some point. Kind of just stepping up to doctor. After this, I have nowhere else to go. So my interests are in veteran healthcare. I do a lot of research with veterans. I intend to work at the VA health system. So I can't answer very many of your guys' questions as far as the traditional path getting into the School of Medicine. I think that's why they need Asha. Because I didn't actually do the AMCAS, right? I only applied to UCR through the EAP. So any of your specific questions as far as that or the non-traditional path into medicine, I'm happy to answer those.
And Kevin is going into psych. So since this is a psych group, just thought I'd mention that because he didn't.
Right, yeah, my interests are in psychiatry and primary care. Of course, those are the two main concerns of veteran healthcare. So anything that has to do with those two fields, I'm also interested in. I have led the psychiatry interest group for a number of years. I'm not doing that presently. And I also have two other interest groups, Families in Medicine, where if you are married with children or with a significant other, we have regular meetings. Irregular meetings now, right? But we like to get together, sort of talk about the hardships of being a family, having a kid, and trying to actually pass your exams. And then veteran programs on campus, I'm also a part of.
Could you guys maybe share how you made the decision to pursue medical school over any other career options that you might have been considering when you were in our shoes?
Well, I covered that a little bit. I just ran out of options. So I did pre-hospital medicine, I did nursing, I did hospital administration. And in each of those, I was a little dissatisfied because I wasn't leading the team necessarily. I felt like and this might sound a little egotistical, but I felt like my decision making was better than most of the other people who I worked with in those fields, and that I was kind of tied. My hands were kind of tied in the decision making process. Even after I went to administration, where I'm making most of the decisions for the hospital, I wasn't making care decisions. After that, I determined that probably the best fit that I was going to have would be as a provider responsible for making the primary health decisions for my patients. And I've been very satisfied ever since starting medicine.
And for me, I was a much more traditional applicant than Kevin. I applied in college and I started med school right after college. But I know for me, a lot of people in my family are doctors, so I've always been around it and it always just kind of like fit. So I always knew I wanted to do something in medicine. And I know I hated research. I did a lot of it in college and I hated it. So I knew that I didn't want to go the academic route. And my interest is in family medicine, so primary care. And so when we're applying for residencies, I'll be applying to family medicine programs. And I know a lot of my interest in that is being able to connect with people over a long period of time, seeing them longitudinally. So that's my specific interest and my specific draw to family medicine. But I know medicine in general just always kind of fit for me because it's a mix of critical thinking and decision making, but also interactions, social interactions with people. And that's always been really important to me. So I think that's kind of how I branched into family medicine from just medicine in general, but it always was a fit for me, to be honest.
For both of you guys, one is traditional, one is non-traditional, but you both still went through an application process. And I was wondering, what's one thing that you're really glad that you did when considering what you were going to apply to medical school with, and what's something that you wish you would have done or would have done differently?
So I know for me, one thing that I'm really glad that I did in college, I mean, first of all, going into college, which might be different from most of you or some of you, is that I already knew that I wanted to apply to medical school when I was in college, when I started college. So from the beginning, I was very deliberate in the extracurriculars that I did, the research that I did, the volunteer things that I did, so that when I wrote my personal statement, everything was really cohesive, and it was a really clear motivation and a clear story. So I think that's one thing I'm really glad that I did, was kind of keep track of what I was doing and being very deliberate about doing important things that would build to me being a good applicant, rather than just kind of doing random things and wasting my time. For me, I think one thing I wish I would have done differently, honestly, I wish I would have taken a gap year. I think in my opinion, my experience, I feel like I rushed it maybe a little bit. Not a lot of people go to med school straight from college. For some people, it's because they didn't get in, but for some people, they deliberately take a gap year. And I think it's important to get some experience in other things and kind of relax a little bit before you get into med school. Because for me, once I got in, I was okay, it's I'm settled, it's all good. But the work started there. So as hard as I had worked up until that point, I had to draw from a whole new motivation and all this new energy I had to have to be the best med student that I could be. So I wish I took a gap year, long story short. I think that would be my answer.
So for me, in my opinion, the most important and significant thing that you could do, especially if you're looking at UCR School of Medicine and the EAP pathway, would be getting connected with the student-led clinics. I know that you can do that as an undergraduate, both in the San Bernardino and Riverside free clinics. If you aren't associated with those two programs, then you have an uphill battle applying to UCR. So if any of you are thinking about the EAP program, you have to definitively display your connection to Riverside County, and also the School of Medicine, and practicing or further practice here. By doing that, what I did when I went through those student-led clinics is not only was I able to work directly with faculty and physicians from the region, but they were able to define for me a lot of what it meant, not just to be a doctor, but what it meant to be a Riverside County doctor. And a lot of those connections that you're going to make are the people who are in charge of most of the programs that you're going to see in the Inland Empire in general. I haven't been there at all this year, so I don't know who all the doctors are still there. Of course, when you get to your third year rotation, the last thing you want to do after a long day of work at the hospital is go do more work in a clinic. So, so I can't speak for the current situation that's going on in those clinics, if they're even running. I don't know. So that would be maybe something to reach out and look at as far as what their application cycle looks like. But you're going to meet all of the premier faculty for UCR, do weekends there, faculty from UHS, Riverside County RUHS, the new medical college or medical school in San Bernardino. All of the faculty at some point rotate through the Riverside and San Bernardino free clinics. So if you are targeting EAP and you do plan to apply primarily as UCR for your number one, I highly recommend and think that might also be necessary for you to start looking at now or as soon as possible.
Could you guys maybe explain what the EAP program is, just so everyone's on the same page?
Sure. So the early assurance program was designed. Okay, so I'm speaking a little bit speculatively. Was designed because UCR was having a little bit of trouble holding its best and brightest kids to go into UCR School of Medicine, because UCR at that time was having a little bit of trouble competing as far as scholarship options and different monetary incentives to get the people with the, well, at the time when I took it, it was like a 40 on the MCAT, the 4.0 GPA. I don't know what that means now as far as the scoring goes, but just really high scoring, really high GPA, very competitive kids from UCR weren't staying at UCR, and they were being incentivized to go to UCLA and UCSF and other places because of the packages they were able to offer from their endowments. So what UCR did is they established a program that would allow you to be guaranteed a spot and acceptance at UCR School of Medicine before the June 1st application cycle opening. That way, when you did put your AMCAS in, you only applied to UCR with guaranteed acceptance. So what that did is it did two things, right? One, it meant that kids were no longer applying, or some of the best UCR students were not applying to other programs because they had already been taken out of the pool. And then second, they were able to identify the people who they were going to kind of front load a lot of their scholarship opportunity to. And then they did a kind of a second level incentive for the student because UCR, of course, was kind of taking you out of the pool. They were giving you it's money saving on the front end, because you don't have to go through the process of applying nationally to different programs. You don't have to make flights or anything, or schedule your interviews. And I understand that can be kind of complicated sometimes. I didn't do any of that. So I don't know specifically, but I can imagine. And then the second part is we didn't have to take the MCAT. So I did take my MCAT, so it was the first year that they did it, so I had already gone through that process. But I think now if you apply into EAP, you don't have to have a completed MCAT score. I am not exactly up to date on if they have amended that process, so that would be a question for Michelle. But that was my understanding, at least, of the program when I went through it, and the 2 years after. So that's when I stopped kind of following the process.
Yeah, just to kind of echo what Kevin said, everything in terms of our EAP program is accurate. As of now, we do not require applicants to take the MCAT exam, but if you do take the MCAT, you will have to report it to us when you do apply. So it's not a requirement, but if you take it, you have to report the score to us.
I also understand that you can apply in your junior year. I don't necessarily know if that's still true.
Yeah.
Okay, so
yeah.
you can apply in the junior year without the MCAT score, kind of guarantee your spot in, so that you transition directly into medicine upon graduation of your fourth year. And then also, if you are not accepted into EAP during that first application cycle, then you can still take your MCAT in your senior year, and you're not behind. So there's no real disincentive for not applying to the EAP program, so long as you meet the requirements and you are a high level, high performing student. Then EAP is a very nice entry point into the UCR School of Medicine. Especially if that's already your number one program. You want to do community medicine, you want to stay in the Inland Empire, you fit all the criteria. If any question marks come up during the interview, you're not going to make it, right? Like you have to be mission fit, you have to be a very high performer, someone who's going to be make it through the process, and generally would compete very well everywhere else. So if you are an applicant that would likely be accepted at Harvard or Stanford or UCLA or UCSF, then you are also in the running for the EAP. Not to say that folks who are not necessarily as competitive numerically. I think one thing that UCR does very wonderfully is that they look at the whole applicant. In they call it like a 360 application or something like that, and they go through all the pieces of your life, not just in the application, but during the interview as well. It's not the traditional MMI. You do have other interviews directly with the premier faculty. Mine was with Dr. Schiller at the time. He's since retired. But you do have to go in there and defend yourself, your mission fitness, and why you deserve EAP. And if everything checks out, then you don't necessarily need that 4.0 2000 on your MCAT, right? Then if you fit the picture and they want you, they will fight for you as well. So it's a really nice kind of entry point. And I'll provide my email to you guys if you have very specific questions. I know that the EAP opens early on. It's like April or May is usually when that application cycle opens. So it's probably open now. So you guys probably have already seen that primary application for the EAP if you're interested in that.
Michelle, can I ask you a question? You mentioned that students don't have to take their MCAT. Is that just for the AP program, or is that currently with the COVID situation? Because I know some schools are waiving MCATs for this year for everybody.
Yeah, so that's just specifically for the EAP program.
Okay.
EAP is more of an in-house program that's specific to School of Medicine. For the Thomas Hyder program, you guys would still be required to take the MCAT. I know there's a lot going on with COVID, so in terms of that, we're still asking applicants to still apply to the School of Medicine if you're unable to take your MCAT, but in order to actually matriculate into the School of Medicine and actually start, you will need an MCAT score, but you won't be penalized for not having it by the traditional deadline given this.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
I have a question. So you guys are third years, right? So you guys were rotating when the crisis started. Was this type of risk where you go into work and you're risking your life every day something that you were expecting to happen so quickly? And like, if it wasn't, how have you been coping and dealing with that moral decision of like how you risk your life every day?
Kevin, you want to take that one, or you want me to answer it?
I think we could both sort of speak a little bit differently on those.
Okay.
So in my experience, I have already been through a number of years where my life was at significant risk. So my understanding of the situation was probably a little bit more tempered than somebody else who was experiencing that. During that time, I was also on my medicine cardiology rotation. So I had almost zero risk in that particular rotation. I had just come off of my trauma surgery, which was in the ER all the time, so that would have been a little different, but my experience was almost nothing. Now, I am sensitive to the fact that there are a lot of potential for specifically moral injury that exists inside of the health workers scenario right now. In fact, I'm working with a researcher in San Francisco studying that exact thing. So we're questioning whether health workers are at the same kind of risk of veterans and medics in the Army, and sort of being treated like not treated, but expected to sort of behave in the same way that a soldier would, or like a conscripted soldier. So we have suspicion that there's going to be an increased relative risk for things like moral injury and psychiatric disease or psychiatric symptoms that model PTSD that we see in the veteran community. We are actively researching that now, and we're going to publish our paper at the end of June. So if any of you guys are interested in sort of working with that or that particular question, you could email me privately and we could talk about how you can get connected with that.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, obviously I don't have the history that Kevin does with, you know, risking your life, but I would agree that in my rotations, my experience with COVID was almost nothing as well. I was on peds and OB-GYN, and I remember like the day before they shut rotations down for us, I was in a C-section, I did an emergency DNC, and delivered 2 babies. Like, not me, but like I was involved in, you know, Kevin knows what I'm talking about. Like I didn't do it, but like I was there. But so like the day before they shut all our rotations down, like I was still able to do all that stuff. So I would say in the facility itself, like my experience with COVID was like nothing. But now that we've been at home, understanding why we're at home, I think, is important, because a lot of us are frustrated that we're not able to see patients anymore, because that's where our learning is happening. But there's just not enough PPE for us, and we need to understand why we are not the priority. So I think it's just been a learning curve for everybody. But I would say personal experience with COVID has been very, very limited. And I think that's why it's hard for a lot of people in like the lay community to understand how serious it is, because they're not seeing it either. So yeah, I would say that's been my experience.
Thank you.
I know a lot of undergraduate students that are considering med school ask the question when they're in the decision process of like, what if I get halfway through and then I change my mind? Do you have any like perspective or like personal experience that could help students that are maybe questioning that?
Like halfway through med school or halfway through like the application process?
Halfway through med school.
Well, I can tell you I did feel that way. And I think it's really common to feel that way. I think that's why it's really important to be really deliberate when you're doing your extracurriculars and when you're doing your application, to make sure at that time that you're motivated enough to get through it, and that it's the right thing for you. That's not to say that there aren't career changers. I mean, like, look at Kevin. And then there's like some people who were in our class that like were engineers for years, and then they did a career change and are now in med school. But I think once you've committed to med school, it's a little bit different than any other career choice, in that you've invested a lot of money and you've invested a lot of time, that like those skills aren't like, they're transferable to a certain extent, but like once you're halfway through med school, like all you can say is, oh, I finished half of med school. But I do want to say that like it's valid to feel that way, because it's really tough. And like in third year, you're going to be pimped a lot. I don't know if you guys know what pimping is, because I didn't when I was in college, but it's basically when you're on rotations and attendings are like asking you rapid fire questions to see if you know the answers. And the goal is to see what you don't know. Like they'll ask you questions until you don't know something. So like when you're going through that day after day after day, it's really hard to feel confident in your abilities and feel like med school was right. And for me, even the first and second year, which is all exams and didactics, I thought I was a really good test taker. And then all of a sudden, I'm like not as good as I thought, because everybody you're with is a really good test taker. So now you're compared to all the best of the best, and you're like now in the middle or like the low range of that. And that really like tests your confidence. So I think it's important to know that not to expect to feel that way, but if you feel that way, you're not the only one who does. And just to remember that you chose this career for a reason, and you just have to remember that reason. So yeah, big fish, little pond effect. Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. Because especially for me, because I went to a really small school, a really small college, and I was like a really, really competitive applicant. Like at that college, like I got a 3.94 GPA, and like I had all this research and all this volunteer stuff, and I looked really, really good on paper. And I think I'm like pretty personable, and I'm like a talkative person. So I'm really good at interviews generally. But then I come here and like everybody is that way. So I think you have to anticipate those things. but know that it's normal to feel like that. And UCR has like a lot of really good resources for social support and emotional support. So I think that's important to know if you're planning on applying to UCR, that they're very supportive in general. But it's a lot of people end up feeling that way.
I think that I could parrot Asha there 100%. I feel that way at least once a day, where I have to really dial back in, try and figure out what that motivating factor was, why I am doing this all the time. And if you do not have a firm foundation right now, before you put that application in, then seriously consider either withdrawing or holding off on that application. Because if you have questions and you, throughout the process while you're in medical school, and you don't have answers immediately, and I mean firm ass answers, you will break down regularly. So if you even are considering that you may have that question in the future, seriously sit down, do some introspection, find out what it is that's actually motivating you to get into medicine, because that is the only thing you're going to have when you're in your third year at the end of 14 hours and you are desperate and done, and you know you still have 6 years to go. So it's a complicated mess, and it is heavy and it is hard, and there is a lot of support, but you're not dodging that bullet. So you need to armor up right now. You need to figure out what it is that motivates you to do this, and have those answers to those hard questions before you push enter on AMCAS.
So I have a question. You mentioned the gap year. I would say a lot of these things apply to PhD programs as well. So I tell students to not apply for PhD programs if they have these doubts. Maybe they're exacerbated from medical school, but certainly for academic positions, it's similar.
I might say that they're the exact same. I wouldn't discount the rigor of a PhD.
Yeah. Do you have any suggestions for students who do want to take a gap year? What kinds of things might they be able to do in that year? So like, are there opportunities for shadowing or volunteering or things that exist at UCR maybe for students who have a year where they could either strengthen their CV or take that time to reflect?
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking like applying for med school or applying for PhD program?
Oh, no, med school.
Okay, because I don't know anything about PhD programs.
Yeah, no, I can speak to the PhD side. No, I'm at med school.
Okay, so for med school, I know some things that if I had taken a gap year, some things I would have done. Scribing, I think scribing would have been really helpful for me, because you're getting familiar with all the medical like lingo that I didn't get in college, because I didn't scribe when I was in college. I did have some like clinical experiences, but it wasn't like I was getting as involved as a scribe would. So I think scribing would have been really good. Any kind of clinical involvement is really, really useful. Shadowing, any of the doctors I think at UCR, like faculty, would be glad to take on some undergrads. I think actually during my OB-GYN rotation, there were some undergraduates there, like shadowing while I was rotating there. So they do that. I think that's really useful to see as well, because you're not just seeing the patients, but you're able to see like what the med student experience is like too. So scribing, any kind of clinical thing, but also like enjoying yourself too, because once you're in med school, you're not going to. So I think you should take that time, like, yeah, do some stuff that's gonna, make your CV look good or better than it already looks. But really take the time to, like Kevin said, and like I really think is important, make sure that med school is right. So, travel, like do medical stuff like outside of this country and see what it's like other places. See what kind of like political stuff you can do, or health equity stuff, public health, like all kinds of things, like all aspects of medicine that you can get involved in. Because it doesn't just have to be a year. It could be like 1 or 2 years.
Um,
10 years.
yeah. I just know for me, I mean, I do wish I had taken a gap year, but I think for a lot of people, they hesitate because they worry they're going to like lose their momentum. And I know that was my hesitation in taking a gap year. So anything clinical, anything scribing, but also finding yourself too, I think is really, really important before med school.
I kind of have a question.
Thanks.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kalina.
No, thanks. I was going to say the students in the PhD program do better if they've taken a gap year as well.
That was actually kind of like the segue I was going to ask. It's relevant for both the PhD program and med school. I think this is probably just applicable for all grad school programs, but my experience as an undergrad student, especially, I'm not typical, but I'm still kind of typical within that age range of being within my peers, right? But I have noticed ageism. It's pretty rampant, right? So I know that there's this pressure, especially when we're in high school and when we're starting out in college, that we need to finish high school and college, or finish college as soon as possible and transition straight to the next step, right? Whether that be a master's program or a PhD or med school. And I would like to see your perspective of ageism and if that like stigma is kind of dissipates once you're at the place where you want to be. So do you still see ageism within med school or your PhD program? I just kind of would like that perspective because I think it does dissipate, but I would just like to hear your guys' perspective on this.
I think I could speak pretty directly to that on account of I am an old bearded white guy. So I have experienced absolutely nothing like that at the UCR School of Medicine. In fact, in every class that I've been aware of, there's been a breadth of students from all number of backgrounds, whether they did 10 years of military service, a decade working as a nurse, a couple of guys who are engineers. I mean, if you can imagine the most diverse background that I've ever seen put together, UCR School of Medicine is doing that. Because of that diverse array of medical students that they bring in, I haven't experienced anything like that, not from faculty or any of the students, because all of us are from that same situation, right? A lot of our faculty are at the end of their careers and at the beginning of their careers. Our students are somewhere in the middle of their careers and also at the beginning. And just because of the front end work that UCR has done as far as making very specific selections to create a broad, diverse group of students and faculty, I think that I haven't necessarily experienced that personally. Now, I'm also in general oblivious to other people's, I guess, criticism. So if it does exist, I haven't seen it. And I hope that's a good factor for, or at least a good representation of UCR. Now, does it exist in medicine in general? And unfortunately, the answer is yes. So that does exist. There's major problems as far as students are a little bit older, people from different I guess different paths into medicine, right? There could be a little bit of rub if you're outside of the program that I've been a part of since the beginning. I know that there's a lot of issues and reports out of other programs in California, like UCLA, right? Like as far as racism, ageism, sexism, things like that. It's a well-known problem that most schools are doing something about, as far as putting in like ombuds people or different ways to report abuses or discrimination. So I wouldn't worry too much about that, especially if you're coming to UCR. I've experienced zero, and I don't think I would worry too much about that if I was going into the program or any program in general, because there is kind of a progressive wave that's coming over medicine, and I think that's very hopeful looking forward.
I would agree mostly with what Kevin said. I do think that UCR is very diverse comparatively to other med schools, but I do think, like he said, a lot of med schools, like medicine in general, is trying to progress in the way of diversity. Somebody asked, is that typical for med school or more unique to UCR? I think UCR is unique for a lot of reasons, but I do think that a lot of med schools are trying to create more diverse classes in general. That includes age, race, ethnicity, like everything. So I would say it's not typical for UCR. It's typical for med schools. I think they're all trying to work that way. I will say that as far as ageism goes, like just like Kevin, I haven't experienced it at UCR, but I have experienced it in the community and at hospitals when I'm seeing patients. In general, older patients won't trust me interviewing them alone. As a third year, that is something I'm supposed to be doing and I'm allowed to be doing, is interviewing patients alone. In outpatient clinics, I've noticed that they're more receptive to it, and I haven't got really a lot of pushback from patients. But in the hospital, especially like on medicine rounds or surgery rounds, they do not want to see me alone. They want one of the residents or an attending to be with me. But I think part of that, I mean, obviously part of it is me being young and looking young, and also being a med student, because I have to introduce myself as a med student. But it's interesting because when I bring in a resident that's also a younger looking female, they don't trust them either. So it's usually they want a male resident or a male attending. So I think there's a little element of sexism in that as well. But I do notice that older patients trust me less than younger patients. So, but then I'll also have like a random patient that's like, oh, well, I trust like your expertise more than, you know, that old doctor because he's not up to date as you are. So I think it depends, but I wouldn't say that I don't experience it. I experience it both ways. So just something to keep in mind.
Great. Thank you so much for your guys' answers. I really appreciate it. It's 7:20, so I'm probably going to allow one or two more questions. Does anyone have any other questions that they would like to ask in terms of med school or their experiences, perceptions, or whatever it may be?
What part of the application process was the scariest for you guys?
So if you're applying to EAP, I know that there is a lot of upfront self-doubt of whether you are, I guess, worthy of that application, if you fit what they're looking for. I imagine that also exists across the board for medical school applications, just a degree of self-doubt in some way in particular. So that might be like the scariest thing, right? Eventually sending in that personal statement, saying it's done. I mean, you've worked on this thing for months or maybe years, and finally putting yourself out there for the application cycle. In my experience, that would probably be the scariest thing that I did. All right, like accepting that that I would have to eventually actually do it, and that's a big hill to climb. The first of many, right? So you get to carry on with that cycle more and more and more throughout your career. But I think that would be personally the biggest hurdle that I experienced.
I think for me, the scariest part, well, it comes in waves, because you do the first part, which is all on AMCAS, it's all online, so you have to write your stuff. So that part is scary in that it's like really all on you. Like, what have you done to earn a place in med school, and how can you articulate it in a way that that is good and impressive to med schools? So like that's its own thing. So that was scary, but I feel like I had control over it. I think the most scary part of the whole thing was my very first interview, because I mean, you can prep, like my undergraduate institution like had a practice MMI that we could do like with faculty that knew you really well, because it's a small school. So I had that opportunity. And I did really well on those. So I was like going into my first interview at Western, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna like do this. Like I'm gonna do really well, because I like prepped and I did all this other stuff, because my college is small and not everybody gets that opportunity. But you get in there and everybody's on a level playing field, and you don't really know what questions they're gonna ask you. All you know really is that, oh, it's going to be like a case scenario, or it's going to be like an actual interview with a panel. So other than that, you really don't know anything, and you're with all these other people that you're competing with. So I think that was the scariest part for me. And I'm a very social person in general, so social things usually don't scare me. But that was scary for me, the first interview.
You know what also is pretty terrifying, Asha, and I'm sure you'd probably agree, is when you get that response email.
Oh, yeah.
And you're like, oh, shit.
Yeah. Also scary.
I remember it's like, I've been accepted. I'm like, yay. Oh, God. now I have to do this.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming and presenting to us. We really appreciate your time and answering all of our questions and giving us your emails. It's about 7:24, so this is about when we typically wrap up the meetings. But we really appreciate your time and coming out and addressing us and helping us wade through the scariness of applying to med school.
I hope we were helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.